I am going to be recording y'all. Okay. And sometimes I blank out on what we're supposed to do, so that's why I have my outline. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to briefly talk about the stuff from last week. Text question, chat question. Oh, did I miss you, Sanila? Yeah. Could you introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, my name's Shanila. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm taking my MCAT on July 7th for the second time. I just graduated from Boston University, and I'm in a 4+1 BA MPH program, so I'm continuing on to the School of Public Health to work on my master's.
Awesome. That's really cool. I really actually want to do an MD and PH, but my school is kind of picky about allowing those, so we'll see if I'll be able to do that. But I'm very interested in that kind of stuff, actually.
I think an MPH is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. Okay. So we are now going to talk a little bit about what we did last week, which is my notes over here. The first thing we talked about last week are basically my general tips for how you can improve in the cars section. These are mostly long-term tips. For those of y'all who are testing in the next couple of weeks or so, you might be a little bit too busy to do this kind of stuff. But the best thing that you could do in the long term is just read a book every single day. I'm just reading Game of Thrones. It doesn't have to be the most serious book. Actually, I finished this book, and I'm on the second book in the series. But in order to keep continuity with my classes from last week, we're going to stick with Game of Thrones for right now. Either way, read a book every day. It's the single best thing that you can do to practice on the cars section. If you just practice that skill set of reading every day, it will really take you a long way on cars. People have a lot of trouble knowing how to prepare for cars because it is very alien or foreign to us, for all of us science people, to learn how to read so analytically when it doesn't have anything to do with science. We're more comfortable with learning about biology or learning about physics or chemistry or whatever, but learning to read is a very foreign skill set to us. And so one thing that you can do is just learn to read a book every day. It can be something you enjoy. I have a reading list of books that I personally like, and I'll show you guys that in a second. But I also want to mention that the most important thing in the cars section is to get in the mind of the author. One of the reasons that the cars section is so different from the other sections of the MCAT is because all of the other sections ask you to think for yourself. They'll give you facts, expect you to know some facts, and they will ask you to think about those facts. You'll notice that the cars section is called a critical analysis section. That's the CA in the cars. It is not a critical thinking section. A lot of people, it's not asking you for your own thoughts. It's asking you what the author's opinion or the author's thoughts are. So that's something we're going to have to keep in mind as we go through this. One of the things that they love to do as traps is they'll give you things that just sound right. They'll give you things that we probably all agree with. They're just blanketly true statements. But they're not something that the author mentioned or something that matches the author's opinion. And so we can't pick those answers, even though they are objectively true statements. And I did want to talk a little bit about, just review my timing methods from last week. We are going to practice blasts a little bit as we go through this. But we have two different timing methods that we talked about last week. The first one is actually what most people want to do when they look at a cars passage. And here's my cars passage. And what most people want to do is they want to dive in and read this entire cars passage and try and extract as much information as they can out of the cars passage, understand it, and then look at the questions. And I think that kind of stems from most of our background as science people. When we're presented with new information, we want to absorb it into our heads as fast as possible and understand it. In the cars section, that is not always the most efficient thing to do. The reason I say that is because the way that the timing of the cars section works out is this only really works out for you if you can read the passage in 5 minutes. If you can't read the passage in 5 minutes, using method 2, which we'll talk about here, is actually a lot more efficient for you because it'll give you more time to answer the questions. It'll give you more time to review at the end of the test and all those kinds of good things. And sorry, I know that the sun is in the way of my screen. I'm going to move my laptop here so the sun is not in the way as much. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go
Are
ahead.
these times with the new MCAT, you know how it's shorter now? Is it now, is it still 5 minutes, or you still can skim it in 3 minutes, or are you giving a little bit more time or less time?
Yeah, you still basically need to be doing everything in the same amount of time, 5 minutes to read the passage or 3 minutes to skim the passage. The only real difference is if you do this method on the COVID edition, you'll have 1 minute left to, one less minute left to review. So on
If you do the 5 minutes, you have
So if you do 5 minutes per passage on actually reading all the questions, that'll give you 45 seconds per question. And on the full length test, you would be left at the end with 5 minutes to review. On the COVID edition, you'd be left with 4 minutes to review. This method tends to work best for people who are naturally strong readers who love to read every day. For most students, it takes roughly 7 to 8 minutes or so, especially students for whom English is not their first language and they're actually struggling with the reading component of it itself. This is not really the most efficient method. A more efficient method is to skim the passage in roughly 3 minutes. And I know y'all look at me like I'm crazy because I said reading the passage in 5 minutes is really hard, but now I want you to skim it in 3 minutes. But I'll show you how to do that as we go through this. And we're going to write down quick 2 to 6 word summaries of each paragraph. What this is going to leave us is it's going to leave us 1 minute per question to actually answer the question. And it's going to leave us 10 minutes of review time. Or if you were looking at the COVID edition, it'll leave you 9 minutes of review time. And there's a little more detailed of a breakdown down here. This is a note set that's available to y'all on my website, which I'll show y'all in a second. So if you wanted the more detailed breakdown of how the times work out, that's down here. But again, that's not really our focus today. But what we're going to do in order to help us do this is we're going to write a blast. And actually, some people have been asking me, where did I get this method from? And that's a really good question. I have adapted, I guess is the best word, I've adapted this method from a method that is taught in the Kaplan 528 prep books. It is the way that Kaplan teaches it. It's specifically targeted for students who are targeting like a 130 to 132 on the car section. And I have kind of adapted that method to work a lot better for students who are not at that level yet. And the way that we're going to do that is we're not even going to read a majority of the passage. What we're going to do is we're going to look in the first paragraph and we're going to identify a key point or main idea in that paragraph. It's usually the author's opinion. And we're going to keep looking in the other paragraphs for repetitions of that main idea. And we are only going to read sentences that are direct repetitions that have the direct repetition of the main idea. I'll show you all what that looks like. I also have a little backup plan in case you don't find any repetitions of the main idea, which is just to read the first and last sentence. And I'll show you all how that works in a second here. But before we dive into the passages, let's talk really quickly about the website, because I do want to be organizing some stuff through the website in the future. This is the sign-up list. Hopefully, if you're here, you've probably seen the sign-up list at some point or another. But the way that you probably got to that is through my website. And this is the CARS class page for my website. There's our stuff for class 1, the video recording and the material itself. There's also that sign-up list, and there's also a recommended reading list, which is this document right here. And so you can kind of take a look at this recommended reading list. There's some books that have to do with medicine, some books that have to do with social issues, productivity, and just generally more fun books to read, like the classics, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever you like to read. There's probably a section for it up on here. And so if you want to read every day in order to increase your general reading skill, and you're having trouble thinking of what books you want to read, you can always reference this list. It's by no means all-inclusive of books you should be reading. There's mostly books that I like and books that a few of my friends like who helped me contribute to this list. And we also have the material for class 2. And so the first thing that you guys probably actually need in front of you is what it says class material. Those are the passages that we're going to be working on today. This is this document right here. And there's also the class notes. I've actually gone ahead and already uploaded the class notes for you. There'll be a little bit of a spoiler for what I'm about to talk about, but they're mostly targeted toward to look at after the class. Your homework will also be handled through this website. Last week's homework was to basically write a blast and answer some questions using it. And I believe I got to everybody on giving feedback for that individual feedback for that homework. We'll do the same thing this time around, where I'm actually going to have you guys do some practice and identify which question types you're missing the most, so that I can give you some more targeted tips. And I can also kind of tailor my class. If one thing I've noticed is a lot of people struggle with like the strength and weakened type questions. Just this week, looking at the homework that's already submitted. And so we will probably focus on that in the future, in the next coming weeks. But either way, so all of the stuff for the website, the lecture recording for class 2 will be down here. And then for class 3 and so on, all the material is going to be up on this website in the future. So all that being said, there's one other thing I wanted to show you on this website, actually. I wanted to show you a little bit of why I'm doing this. It is right here under what is our goal on Free the MCAT. And one thing that I've noticed when I was working as a SAT tutor and a couple other capacities is that standardized test scores and family income have basically a direct correlation. The single best predictor of your SAT score, of your MCAT score, and your SAT score actually, is not how well you know biology, is not how well you know chemistry, is not how good of a doctor you're going to be one day. It is your family income. And there's a lot of data that you can find supporting that correlation. The earliest I could find is from 1977, back when the MCAT was on that 45 scale, back when there's literally like a test on paper. That same relationship still existed between MCAT score and family income. There's a lot of really striking data that you can look at from other standardized test scores. This data right here is from the ACT exam, where you can really see that with every income bracket, the average ACT score goes up about 1 to 0.5 points, 0.5 to 1, I should say, points. That same kind of data exists for the SAT, MCAT, PCAT, DAT, GRE, et cetera, any kind of test that you can think of. And our goal here at Free the MCAT is to kind of bridge that gap a little bit and help students who maybe cannot afford the fancy Princeton Review courses. Or I just found out the other day that actually Kaplan has one course that is $14,000 for the entire course. And obviously that cost is extremely prohibitive for a lot of students. And we want to provide materials that are less prohibitive. That Kaplan course is absolutely ridiculous. But even Jack Weston's course, not to call out Jack Weston, he does great stuff, but his Just Cars course itself is $1,400, $1,500. That is just for cars. It doesn't cover anything else, though he has a lot of free stuff available. And, okay.
Just a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what do you think Jack does different from like, what do you think he provides, like his type of style of teaching cars? Do you think it's any different from yours or from the general?
I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen his actual cars classes. I've gone through the cars material that Princeton Review teaches. I've gone through what Kaplan teaches. I have gone through a lot of the questions and passages on Jack Weston's site. I haven't actually taken his course, his like the $1,500 MCAT course. So I am probably not the best person to ask about that, though. Maybe there's someone else in this chat you can ask in the chat, and maybe they'll know more about his course specifically. Yeah, let's see what the chat has.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. He does have the free intro class. It's on Tuesdays. It's just the first class. And actually right now, I only have one class up on my website, but hopefully we will build a strong resource for y'all to use. Let's see, read a little bit more about Jack Weston stuff. He says he mainly focuses on the main idea, and his logic is 50-50. Okay, so again, I don't want to like focus too much on what Jack Weston does wrong or what he does right. That's not really the point of this. The point of this is we are going to learn some stuff the first thing we're going to talk about today is question types and the question types that are on the MCAT. AAMC has identified what they call the 5 fundamental skills that you guys need to know and that they're trying to test you on for the MCAT CAR section. These skills basically reflect your ability to read scientific papers one day down the road. Because after med school, after residency, you're no longer going to be sitting in a classroom, but you're still going to be expected to keep up with the main ideas or principles of new developments in medicine. And you're going to need to read a lot. You're going to need to read scientific articles and things like that in order to keep up with those ideas. And basically, the first skill is understanding the basic components of the text. And these generally are what we refer to as pretty low-level questions. They tend to have very direct textual evidence, some common, I guess, threads or some common keywords that are used for these questions are things about the author's central argument, things about the author's overarching theme, the author's main idea, anything like that is what the AAMC would kind of define as a basic component of the text, because generally these things are pretty well stated. The answer choices might be a slight rephrasing of what it is, but generally it's pretty close. It's pretty close between what the author says and what the actual answer is. That's why I say we should have textual evidence. The next one is what they call inferring meaning from rhetorical devices, word choice, and text structure. These are generally questions where they will directly reference a specific paragraph, a specific phrase, a specific word, something like that in the passage itself. These are the very few questions which I actually tell students the first thing that you should do when you answer these questions is you should go back to the text and find that word or that phrase or whatever that he's talking about. Most of the other questions, I like to start with my blast and use my blast to at least eliminate some answer choices. These questions are definitely the exception to that rule. The first thing you should do is go find that word that the question writer is talking about. We also have reasoning within the text, which is these questions are usually kind of related to the main idea, but a very important point, these questions are not going to ask you what is the main idea. They will ask you things about how does the author defend or contribute to his main idea. One common keyword that they like to use is which of the following is an assumption the author makes. And we'll see an example of that question in a few minutes actually. But a very frequent trap on these questions is they will give you the main idea as an answer choice. And everyone loves to pick that answer because we pretty much every resource that you can use to study for CARs will ask you to identify the main idea while you're reading the passage. And you should definitely do that. But know that the main idea in and of itself is not the answer to every question. This question, for example, is asking what is an assumption the author makes? So they're not asking you for the main idea, they're asking generally for an assumption that leads to the main idea. Skill 3A is applying or extrapolating ideas from the passage to new contexts. For those of y'all who were in the class last week, there was I think the perfect example of this question was that whole article that talked about rational businesses, rational fast food, rational home builders, and then they hit you with a question about what would a rational travel agency look like? And so you don't know. If you go back to the text and try and look for something about a rational travel agency, you're not going to find it. It's not there. You have to kind of extrapolate, or that's their keyword that they like, extrapolate or apply the main idea of the text to a new concept. We'll find a couple examples of those questions as we go along. But our last question type is what I call skill 3B, which is assessing the impact of incorporating new factors, information, or conditions to ideas from the passage. The usual keyword that goes along with these questions is suppose. They really like the word suppose, that shows up multiple times on every test and generally leads to these questions, though not every time. Sometimes they phrase it a little bit differently. Basically, they'll hit you with something along the lines of, suppose that X statement is true. What would the author say about it? What would the author think about it? Would that strengthen or weaken the author's argument if that's true? These are questions that a lot of people struggle with, but I'm going to show y'all a little bit of how to approach these questions today. And I know y'all are bored of hearing me talk already. I'm going to send all of y'all these notes. I know some of y'all like to write stuff down, and that's totally okay. But I am going to put these notes. They should already be up on my website, but sometimes I add stuff to them and I re-upload it. So I'll let y'all know if I plan to do that. But let's go ahead, and we'll keep that in mind for a little bit. But we're going to go ahead and approach this first passage on the little document that says Cars Week 2. And what I'd like you guys to do is, most of y'all were in or have seen the class from last week. So I'm going to ask you to write a blast for this first passage, just as a little warm up. Let's practice that same skill set. I will warn you that the two passages today are a little bit trickier than the passages from last week. Maybe not the Homer passage. The Homer passage is pretty hard. But these two passages are what do we do if there's only 2 or 3 large paragraphs? That's a good question, actually. That is a great question. If it's something like that, one thing that you can do is you can find a good point and you can break it up. You obviously can't actually hit enter on the real test, but you can just consider it to be a different paragraph. That's actually something I did to help you guys out with this paragraph, this passage right here. When I originally found this passage, the passage looked like this, where there was this huge block of text at the very beginning. And so in order to help y'all out a little bit, I split it up for you. So you can treat it as paragraph 1, part 2, paragraph 1, part 1, and paragraph 1, part 2. And you can kind of split those things up in order to help you coordinate and not read such huge blocks of text. And I know some people still have chat questions, and I will get back to y'all through the chat. But yeah, I will. We'll talk about those questions in just a second here. But in the interest of time, let's go ahead and I'll have y'all work on the blast for the first section. I'll give y'all 3 minutes and 30 seconds. If you wanted to have 10 minutes to review on the real test, you need to finish the blast in 3 minutes, though most people don't actually need 10 minutes to review. I put that up as a very conservative estimate. Most people, if you don't need all of that review time, you can give yourself a little bit extra time on the blast. I'll give y'all 3 minutes and 30 seconds right now. We're still practicing, and obviously we don't have much review time today. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. Okay, guys, that is time. For those of y'all, I guess I'm realizing now that there's probably a lot of people who are just joining in this week or have not seen the material from last week. So just a few reminders about the blast. The thing that I really like to do for the blast is I don't like to read this entire passage. There's usually a lot of really unnecessary details in this passage. And a lot of the answers, if you're the type of person who likes to overthink things, if you're looking for every single detail in this passage, you can probably overthink your way into justifying a lot of answer choices that are not right in the actual questions. So one thing I like to do is I like to focus only on things that directly relate to the main idea of the passage. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have the students in the class help me do this in a second. But we're going to look for a main idea in this first passage. We're going to try and kind of sum it up in maybe 5 or 6 words, something like that. And we're just going to look for repetitions of those 5 or 6 words in the rest of the passage. We're not even going to read the sentences that don't have repetitions of that word. Again, I do insist that you guys do this on paper. These are my blasts from last week, actually. But I do insist you guys do it on paper. The reason I insist that is because you're not going to be able to type on the real MCAT. You will not have the freedom to do this. And so in order to keep things similar, the only things that I'm going to use when I do this are I'm going to use what you'll have available to you on the MCAT. You will have the highlighting tool that's given to you on the MCAT. It's, I believe it's always a yellow highlighter. I think when I took it, it was always a yellow highlighter. You can't change the colors either. You will have the strikeout tool. You'll be able to cross stuff out like so. And you'll have either a piece of paper or a little laminated sheet or like a whiteboard or something to write on and take some notes on as you do the section. And so if you guys start typing and using all that kind of stuff, when you're doing your practice, you're going to be a little bit thrown off when you get to the real test and you don't have the same freedom to do that anymore. And so in the interest of that, I'm going to insist that all of y'all do the blasts on paper. I am going to type them for the purpose of this class so that y'all can all see them and can read my handwriting and all that kind of stuff. But when you do it for the sake of your practicing, please, please, please do it on paper. It's very important. Okay, so that being said, let's go ahead and we'll start off here at paragraph 1. And for the students in the class, what did y'all think the main idea or the blast of paragraph 1 was?
If I can talk,
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
said that your dignity or like human, it was in the last sentence, dignity is taken away by drugs. Or
Right.
your taken away by drugs.
Very nice. Does anyone have anything that they want to like add to that or anything like that? Just in the interest of letting everybody talk.
Instead of just drugs, I added like drug-induced happiness.
Yeah. So he mentioned this term drug-induced happiness a couple of times. And he says basically this removes dignity. And you can phrase this in any way you want. The real idea is to pick up on what we think is the author's opinion in this first paragraph. One tip that I have for people when they're writing a blast for the first time, if you're having a lot of trouble, I'd say roughly 75% of the time on the CARS passages, you can find the author's opinion in the last sentence of the first paragraph. That's not always the case, especially when you get to some really tricky and more convoluted passages. But for most passages, about 75% of them, if you're totally lost and you have no idea what this person's opinion is, a good place to start looking is the last sentence of the first paragraph. And so we'll do that same kind of deal over here. Human dignity is taken away in exchange for a sense of happiness induced by a drug. And he mentions that same kind of stuff all up in here. Human dignity, he likes. Drug-induced happiness is a clear violation of human dignity. Perfect. And usually they kind of restate all of this and come up with a little like thesis statement sort of deal at the end of the first paragraph. And however you want to phrase that for your own notes is totally okay. But for the sake of this, I'll write drug-induced happiness removes dignity. And my key words that I'm now looking for are drug-induced happiness and dignity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the rest of the passage, and I'm just going to look for those words, drug-induced happiness or dignity. And if the sentence has these things in it, I'm going to read the sentence. If the sentence does not have these keywords in it, I'm probably not going to read the sentence, honestly. So let's go ahead and let's start with paragraph. Let's keep going with paragraph 2. What y'all come up with on paragraph 2?
I said that life is not dominated by the sense of happiness aside from drugs.
Right, exactly. So we can do our same deal. We're going to highlight this stuff about drug-induced happiness, highlights devoid of human dignity. I'm going to highlight life with dignity means freedom to feel unhappiness. I'm going to highlight life with dignity means life that is not dominated by a sense of happiness. Okay, cool. So I'm sorry. Could you repeat what you said for your blast one more time? I lost my train of thought.
Sure. I said that life with dignity is not dominated by a sense of happiness aside from drugs.
Cool. Life with dignity, not dominated by happiness, and you said aside from drugs. Okay, cool. Okay, now let's do the same kind of deal down here in paragraph 3. What y'all come up with in paragraph 3?
That a life with dignity cannot be dominated by unhappiness.
Yes, that's really good, actually. I like that. So we said, again, he's talking about a life with dignity. He says a life with dignity is free from domination by happiness. That's the same kind of stuff he was saying up here. And he goes on about life with dignity, happiness, etc., etc. But he kind of comes to a new thing down here when he says a life with dignity is free from domination by the sense of unhappiness. So we can't be dominated by happiness, and we also can't be dominated by unhappiness. We got to kind of strike a balance between these two things. And once again, he kind of summarizes his point in the last sentence. But he says basically life with dignity, also not dominated by unhappiness. Okay. And again, I'm reading roughly, I don't know, maybe half of the passage or so as I'm doing this. I try and avoid reading a lot of little details in here because sometimes the author says weird stuff just as like a one-off statement somewhere in the passage. And you might really focus on that weird statement and you might be able to justify a wrong answer to yourself if you kind of overthink that weird one-off statement enough. That's why I try and avoid reading things that don't relate to the main idea. The cars section is not detail focused in any sense. The rest of the MCAT can be very detail focused. The cars section is usually not. You might get 1 or 2 questions out of 7 that have anything to do with the detail. Most of them are going to have to do with the main idea of the passage. So what'd y'all come up with on paragraph 4?
Came up with a medical drug can be allowed to overcome domination by unhappiness.
Exactly. Very nice. I think you're probably taking a look at this last sentence down here, and where he says that certain drugs He lists SSRIs as an example for that, even though it kind of sounds like he's contradicting himself a little bit over here, because in the beginning he didn't seem to like drug-induced happiness. But down here, he kind of lists an exception to that rule. He says that certain drugs like SSRIs, for example, are acceptable because people who need SSRIs, people who are depressed, are dominated by a sense of unhappiness or happiness. And so in order to get rid of that domination by a sense of unhappiness, we can use certain psychoactive drugs like SSRIs. And let's see. So I like that just so we can come back to it later. But he says certain drugs, he lists SSRIs, are okay. You see, dominated by unhappiness is bad. That's what I wrote, which seems very similar to what you wrote. Let's go ahead and we'll jump into this last paragraph, paragraph 5. And what y'all come up with in paragraph 5?
I think he comes back here and, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just saying, like, I was gonna have to start calling on people if no one volunteers. And there you go, volunteering.
So he comes back to the SSRI's comment, but what he is against is to a perfect happiness drug.
Yeah, I like that. So he says, he comes back to his little SSRIs thing. He says, SSRIs are not what deprive us of dignity. Their SSRIs are okay, generally speaking. But a hypothetical perfect happiness drug is no good, He has a philosophical investigation of the relationship between human dignity and the manipulation of happiness by a perfect happiness drug. So basically, he's kind of coming to the point of SSRIs are not really what he means by this sense of drug-induced happiness. He's more talking about something like an opioid or something like that, which just gives you happiness and is not giving you any therapeutic value. He does not like things like that, but SSRIs in general are okay. Let's see. We'll write that SSRIs are okay. Perfect happiness drug is bad. Perfect happiness drug is bad. And he returns to those same kind of principles if we want to look at the rest of this passage. Again, I try to read the minimum amount I can and still get the main idea. But if we want to go a little bit deeper, we can still read a little bit about, he comes back to his thing about drug-induced happiness, dominates a person, and that deprives them of a life of dignity. A person who is dominated by despair and unhappiness is also basically undignified because they're dominated by despair and unhappiness. Okay, so that being said, we have our little blast or our little summary here, which we'll refer back to. Most of the questions, you will at least be able to eliminate 2 or 3 answer choices based purely off this blast. A few of the questions, it might be in our best interest to go back to the passages to be sure, because again, we read like maybe a third of the passage or a half of the passage. So in order to be really sure of our answers, sometimes we'll jump back to the passage. But most things we'll start off by just looking at our blast. So the first question is, which of the following is an assumption that underlies the author's attempt to raise an alarm about SSRIs? So now, this is one of the keywords for question types that we were talking about before. And this keyword that we're really looking at is, too many documents, is the word assumption. Which of the following is an assumption the author makes? Basically something similar to what they're asking. They're basically asking, which of the following is an assumption the author makes about SSRIs? Can't type today. So we have to keep in mind that we're not looking for the author's idea about SSRIs. That will be a trap answer. You guys will see this. I'll prove this to you in a second. But the main idea of what the author was saying about SSRIs, this idea that SSRIs are good because you're not dominated by unhappiness anymore, that will probably be a trap answer. We are not looking for the author's idea about SSRIs. We are looking for an assumption the author makes about SSRIs. So let's go ahead. We'll keep that in mind. And we will take a look at this first question. The use of SSRIs is totally unsafe. Well, I'm not a big fan of that. That doesn't seem too much like what my author is saying. He says SSRIs are good if they help you avoid domination by unhappiness. The next thing is experiencing some unhappiness is necessary in order to have dignity. Well, this is definitely something the author thinks. He says if you're happy all the time or you're unhappy all the time, that's no good. You need to have a balance between both those things in order to have dignity. So I kind of like this one. We'll hold on to it for now. Happiness drugs are useful when used by people who are dominated by despair. Now this is the perfect example of the trap answer, because this is what the author says about SSRIs, what the author says about SSRIs. This is the main idea. And if I'm purely looking for like recognition things, well, I recognize this answer. That's basically what my author was saying and what I put down in my blast about SSRIs. But the key thing about this question is we're looking for an assumption that underlies the author's blah, blah, blah. We're not looking for the author's main idea. But a lot of people still like this answer choice. A lot of people think, oh, that's what the author's saying. We'll go ahead and pick that. We'll keep it for now. Definitions of happiness are the same from culture to culture. Well, I don't think he ever really got around to saying stuff about that. It doesn't say like Americans look at happiness this way, other people look at happiness some other way. It seemed pretty universal, the points that he was making. He was talking about like all people. And so we'll take that one out. And I guess I've already told y'all that this is the trap answer. But now I'm left with two answers, one of which is correct and one of which is the trap answer. And the reason that I'm going to pick this as the correct answer is because this is more of an assumption. Again, we're looking for an assumption versus just the main idea that the author's talking about. Okay, the next question is, the author meets a woman who says, oh, here's one of my keywords, suppose. So that means I'm looking at a type 3B question, assessing the impact of incorporating new factors, information, or conditions. So this stuff that he's about to say is all new information. This is not in the passage. The author meets a woman who says, I don't need alcohol to be happy. I'm happy all the time anyway. The author is most likely to view this woman as, okay, so this was a type 2 question up here. This is a type 3B question over here. This is one that people kind of struggle with, but I don't think this one was too bad. This question type is one that people struggle with, but what's striking me right here is that this lady is happy all the time. No matter what's going on, no matter what is going on in the life around her, she's always happy. She has no balance between happiness and unhappiness. So I don't think the author is really going to like this lady. But we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at what these answer choices say. Let's see. Being self-righteous? No, I didn't see self-righteous anywhere in the passage. I didn't see anything that kind of relates to self-righteous. Lacking in dignity. Well, this one's better because at least we're talking about dignity. And the author's main point is about dignity. So we'll keep that one for now. Being dishonest about how happy she is. Well, our author didn't really talk too much about lying about how happy you are. So we'll go ahead and take that one out. has more dignity than a person who uses alcohol to increase their happiness? Okay, so this one is also, again, about dignity. You'll actually find a pretty recurring principle in this section of the test is that usually, this is not always the case, two answer choices are pretty irrelevant to what's going on in the passage. Then we'll have two other answer choices. Two other answers, one of which is obviously right, and the other is a trap. And so what we have to do at this point, we've eliminated two answer choices, and I know that one of these is going to be the right answer, one of these is going to be a trap. But how am I going to figure that out? Well, let's go back to our new information. I don't need alcohol to be happy. I'm happy all the time anyway. Does the author think that someone who is going to be happy all the time has more dignity or has less dignity? And the vibe I'm getting from the author is because he talks a lot about you need happiness and unhappiness. So I don't think that this person is going to have a lot of dignity, at least in the author's opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this one, B. I'm going to go ahead and pick B, and I'll get y'all's questions in the chat in just a second here. Because I think that this lady, at least in the author's opinion, because she's happy all the time, is not super high dignity, at least in my author's opinion. Let's see. Drugs like SSRIs. Trapped. When did the author raise the alarm about SSRIs? That's a good question. So we'll go back and we'll kind of talk up here. We can kind of look back over here, just where he's talking about SSRIs in general. I do agree that this term raise the alarm is a little bit confusing because I don't think that's really what he was doing with SSRIs. But the main point is just that he's talking about SSRIs. And I do think this lady is lower in dignity than a person who uses alcohol to increase their happiness. He did talk about people who lack in dignity quite a few times. Let's see, he said, hence dignity is taken away. Life without dignity, a life with dignity, stuff like that. So he does talk about having dignity versus not having dignity quite a few times. Okay, so we picked this answer choice. And again, this seems kind of like a trap because he does talk about drug-induced happiness sometimes, but I don't think that drug-induced happiness was a die-hard rule for my author. Just because this lady drinks a lot and she's happy doesn't necessarily mean that she is high dignity or low dignity. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. A person who uses alcohol to increase their happiness is not super high dignity, but this lady is not high dignity either because she's happy all the time. That's no good. Okay, the next question. It can be inferred from the passage that the author believes that SSRIs, and these questions are a little bit, these sometimes trick students because this is a bit of a more direct question than the other tricky questions. This is basically, what is the author's main point or the overarching theme about SSRIs? What is the author's main idea about SSRIs? That's what I'm really looking for as I answer this question. And let's see, let's go back to our passage. And should be used to provide temporary relief from despair. Now that sounds kind of familiar to me. He says that SSRIs can provide temporary relief from despair. If you read the entire passage, he actually did say at some point temporary relief from despair. When I did my blast, I actually didn't read that part, but this still seems generally to vibe with what my author is saying. So we'll keep that one for now. Are completely unnatural. I don't think he ever said that directly. I don't like that one too much. Gross distortions of reality. Again, Not really. That's not really what my author is saying. Maybe if you have a ton of background in like neuropharmacology, you might know that some SSRIs can give people hallucinations. I was a neuro major. I happen to know that. But again, this is about what the author thinks, not about what I think. Should be illegal. Well, my author never said that one. I'm not a big fan of that. We'll take that out. And we are left with one answer choice that basically sums up what my author thinks about SSRIs. And once again, this was a 1A type question, basically looking for my author's main idea, in this case, the author's main idea about SSRIs. Let's do the next one. One of the author's central arguments, there's my little buzzword, this is still a 1A question. We're looking for my author's central argument about a life with dignity. This is a 1A question one more time. My buzzword for that was central argument. So, is a life free from domination by a sense of happiness? Well, that's definitely bad. We don't want to be dominated by a sense of happiness, per my author. Dominated by a sense of unhappiness, that's also bad. Actually, my author says that one's bad too. So these can't both be right. So we have to do a little bit more reading. But domination by either a sense of happiness or unhappiness. And I think this one is actually a better answer, because domination by happiness is bad, domination by unhappiness is bad, and this one kind of encompasses both of those. And, ooh, I was supposed to delete this, but there's my little note. The most commonly missed answer over here is drug use. And he does talk about drug use a lot. He says drug-induced happiness is bad, it's a violation of human dignity, blah, blah, blah. But his main point was more about domination. A life that is not dominated by a sense of happiness, a life with dignity is free from domination of negative thoughts, etc., etc. That's more his main point or essential argument than the stuff about drugs. And another way I could figure that out is because he says that some drugs are actually good. Some drugs, like SSRIs, are totally okay. And so the main point, at least, is not really about drug use. And between these answer choices, while these two are true, this is probably a better answer because it encompasses both of these two. Everyone kind of with me on that? How I figure that out? Okay. This is one that people get confused on sometimes. So if you have some questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll get to your questions. Which of the following is an example of someone the author would most likely consider to be living a life without dignity? Okay, so which of these people is a life without dignity? And I did leave a few of my notes over here. You can take a look at that to help you. But the first one is an optimist who sees the bright side of bad situations. You know, I can see how this sort of relates to the passage, but he didn't really talk about optimism or pessimism very much. His real point is not too much about outlook. He didn't really say that, you know, you can become happier just by looking at life in a different way or something like that. I don't think outlook is exactly what he's getting at through his passage. We'll go ahead and take that one out. A sensual hedonist who values pleasure above all else. There's one. In case you don't know what hedonist means, it's basically the rest of the stuff in the question. A hedonist is someone who values pleasure above all else. So this is someone who only feels happiness. And well, this is someone my author is not going to like, because my author doesn't like people who only feel happiness. So we'll go ahead and leave that answer choice there for now. Let's look at this other one. A cynical pessimist who sees the negatives in the world. So this is once again like an outlook question. We had optimist over here, pessimist over here. And again, I don't really think that outlook was the main focus of what my author's getting at. We'll go ahead and take that out. An unfeeling sociopath who doesn't feel much either way. So this is someone who doesn't feel happiness and doesn't feel unhappiness. Huh. So once again, we've eliminated 2 answer choices because they're kind of irrelevant to the situation. Outlook is not too much the focus of the situation. And we have 1 answer choice, obviously, that's going to be right, and 1 answer choice that's going to be wrong. And we have to kind of figure that out. And what I really noticed over here is that my author says that in order to be dignified, in order to have dignity, you need happiness and unhappiness. Well, this person only has happiness. They don't have unhappiness. But this person has no happiness or unhappiness. So as far as if you wanted to make like a ranking, someone who's balanced is at the very top in my author's mind. Someone who has only one of those things is kind of in the middle, and someone who has neither of those things would be way down at the bottom in terms of my author and what he thinks about dignity. So we'll go ahead and pick this one because this guy does not have either of the criteria for happiness, or for dignity, excuse me. At least this person has happiness. It's not exactly good, he's dominated by a sense of happiness, but this person doesn't have happiness or unhappiness, and that's even worse. So we'll pick that one. And what is the function of the phrase, excuse me, I didn't put my question type over here. Which of the following is an example of someone the author would most likely think doesn't have dignity? And all of these things are new contexts. All of these situations, an optimist, a pessimist, someone who only feels happiness, these are not exactly things that my author has directly mentioned. But I'm kind of having to apply that main concept to this new situation. So this is a type 3A question. 3A question. We're applying the same principle to a new situation. And let's take a look at question 6. What is the function of the phrase, hence they are devoid of human they're considered to be devoid of human dignity in paragraph 2? Now you guys are probably noticing that in most of these questions, I answered them directly off the blast. This question over here is the exception to the rule. The reason is because they are specifically mentioning this particular phrase that's in paragraph 2. And if we put a question type to that, that is question type 1B. For practice purposes, when you're actually doing questions for practice, it helps on the labeling to know if it's 1A or 1B. But obviously on the real test, you're not immediately going to see a question and be like, oh, this is a type 1A question. But the real point, the reason I'm having you guys do this is because there are specific things and strategies we can target for different types of questions. When you see this type of question that we call a 1B question, you always, always, always go back to the text and you find this phrase. Hence, they are considered to be devoid of human dignity. So let's go ahead and do that. It's in paragraph 2. Okay, so that's this deal right here. Hence, they're considered to be devoid of human dignity. And let's go ahead and let's read around a little bit here and let's figure out why he's saying this. In the case of drug-induced happiness, those people are deprived of the freedom to feel unhappiness and are degraded to a plaything of mere inclinations. Hence, they are considered to be devoid of human dignity. This means that a life with dignity necessarily requires one's freedom to feel unhappiness. Okay, so I found my phrase. I kind of read around a little bit. I got the vibe. Let's take a look down here at what that is going to lead to. Is building up to the argument that SSRIs are completely unethical. Well, no, that's not it. First of all, he doesn't think that SSRIs are completely unethical. And second, his stuff about SSRIs is way down here. And the phrase that we were looking at is up here. So we're not going to like that. Is building up to the argument that drug-induced happiness is necessary. No, he doesn't say that it's necessary. He says that in certain situations like SSRIs, it might be okay. But I think necessary is a bit of a stretch for what he thinks in that situation. And then we have these two. Is a logical step in an attempt to explain the relationship between human dignity and drug-induced happiness. The relationship between human dignity and drug-induced happiness. Okay, I can kind of see that. It is about the relationship between human dignity and drug-induced happiness. It is kind of an opposite relationship. Drug-induced happiness leads you to not have dignity, but I guess that's still a relationship. So we'll hold on to that. Is a logical step in an attempt to explain the relationship between organic happiness and drug-induced happiness. And I'm not a big fan of this one because I don't know what they mean by organic happiness. I don't know that my authors ever specifically talked about organic happiness, and what that means and what the relationship between that and drug-induced happiness is. That does not really sound, I don't recognize that point from what I read. We'll go ahead and take that one out, and that leaves us with one answer choice. Awesome. Cool. So we answered most of these questions straight off the blast. Obviously we still have the passage up here. If ever we have some doubts, we can jump back to it. The only exception to that rule is this type of question. What is the function of the phrase? Frequently they ask you something along the lines of, what does the author mean by the word in paragraph? Whatever, same kind of deal. We always want to jump back and find that word or this phrase that he's talking about, because that's how they trick you. That is how they trick you. We might think that some of these other things, drug-induced happiness is necessary. Maybe that's relevant. I don't know. SSRIs are unethical. Maybe that's relevant. I don't know. But we really have to focus on just this part around that phrase and not look at all the other stuff, because they localized it for you. They did you a favor. They told you that your answer is somewhere in here. So take the favor, take their help, find that phrase, and use that information to help you answer the question. Okay, now what I'd like you guys to do is we're gonna work on passage 2. I'm gonna ask you to, let's see. I want you guys to, number 1, I want you to write the blast for passage 2. Number 2, I would like you to identify question types down in the questions down there. And number 3, I'd like you to answer the questions. Answer the questions. Very important. We always need to answer the questions. So what I'm going to do in order to help you guys with that is I'm going to leave my notes, my question type notes, available to y'all on the screen here. Oops. Let's see. So I'm going to put that right here. And I also have my timer. I'll set a timer for y'all. And I will set this timer for 11:30. I do that because it's about 3.5 minutes to read the passage, or skim the passage, 7 minutes for the blast, and I'll go ahead and give you an extra minute. We're just practicing, and you can count that as your review time. So please go ahead and get started, guys. Okay, guys, that is time. We'll cut the time right there. Okay. How did y'all feel about the timing on that one?
Good.
Good? Not too bad. That is
Yeah.
roughly the time that you would have to take the test in real life. If you took that full 11:30, you would cut it real close to the end. You wouldn't leave yourself any review time. I kind of gave you the review time as well, but that's okay. A lot of people actually do better when they don't do the review time because they tend to go back and like second guess themselves or change right answers to wrong answers and things like that. So we can definitely talk about, actually next class, we're gonna focus a lot on trap answers and what to do when you're reviewing your answers and things like that. If you guys are interested in one-on-one tutoring at all, it's not mandatory by any sense of the word, but I do offer one-on-one tutoring. I have a limited amount of time. I believe that I'm not doing today. Tomorrow is full. I think there might be some space left on Sunday. And I do probably maybe like 20 hours or so a week of this. And we can definitely do that. If you guys want to do that, then go ahead and send me an email. You can send me an email right now, or you can send me an email when we're done with this session. I'll send you a link to sign up for one-on-one tutoring. There's also, make sure when you do it, there's a little box to give like a description of what you want to focus on. So if you fill out the box, it helps me out because that way I have an idea of what I'm doing in the tutoring session before I jump in. Otherwise, we're going to spend the first like 15, 20 minutes just talking about what do you need help with, when are you taking your test and things like that. So in order to be a little bit more time efficient, if you want one-on-one tutoring, just fill out the little description box as well. But either way, let's jump on over to passage 2. What did y'all think about as a blast for this passage? What about paragraph 1? What did y'all take away from paragraph 1?
The main idea was like in the first sentence. So if you like skip and go to the last sentence, you would have.
Right. This is a tricky one because the last sentence over here doesn't tell you much. Something about a village doctor, something. But the main idea over here is actually in the first sentence of the first paragraph. This is in the minority. Generally, the last sentence does a pretty good job of summing the stuff up. What exactly did you put as your blast?
I put Westerner knowledge is individual and non-Westerner knowledge is communal.
Knowledge, individual, other. Did you phrase? What did you say for the other community? Sorry, you say just other.
Yeah, it's communal.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I guess he didn't specifically say it's like non-Western knowledge. I guess the best way to put that, but that's okay. We're just taking notes. I know what that means. You know what that means. That's good enough for us. Let's see. What about paragraph 2? Oh, sorry. One other thing. I wanted to make this point. There's a reason I picked this passage. One thing that I do like to do when I do my blasts is if they reference somebody's name and they sound important, go ahead and write it. Go ahead and write it down. This person, Professor whatever Merriam, a lot of what this author is saying in this first paragraph is kind of built on Professor Merriam's ideas. And that is going to help us on a lot of questions because I'll get to your question in a second here, Yasong. That is going to help us on a lot of questions, especially passages like this, where we have Professor Merriam saying one thing over here, and then later on we're going to have this other guy, Downey, saying another thing, and we're going to have this other lady saying something else over here. It'll help us keep all of these things straight. If the questions ask us specifically about one person's ideas, let's go ahead and write down this person's name, Merriam. Okay. That's just a tip that I picked up with my experience of doing this. I really like to write down these people's names. But either way, let's go ahead and we'll move on to paragraph 2. What y'all think on paragraph 2?
So for my blast, I wrote forever learning.
Forever learning, right. That's a good one. Let's see. Learning does not stop once the person has left a formal institution. So we're really looking for stuff about education and knowledge and so on. And we're looking at things about the individual or communal as well. But so at the very beginning, it leads with some education stuff or learning. It does not stop once the person has left a formal institution. The majority of learning happens outside formal institutions. Professor Merriam contrasts this type of learning with learning geared toward bettering one's vocation in Western culture. So in Western culture, our learning is focused on one's vocation, okay? There's another thing. And once again, non-Western culture ends view learning as lifelong, forever learning, like you said. So what I wrote for my blast is I wrote the non-Western cultures do forever learning. Awesome. And I also liked this sentence over here, vocation. It seems like the Westerners focus on vocation. Okay. I promise I'm a lot better at typing when I'm not screen sharing. For some reason, whenever I'm screen sharing with people, my typing skill just goes like way down. Western focused on vocation. And I'm kind of getting a vibe here that what we're really doing is we're comparing and contrasting Western knowledge or education or learning or whatever with other. And so at the beginning, we were talking about individual versus communal. Here we're talking about learning forever versus learning for a job. Okay, cool. So let's keep that in mind. And let's go over to paragraph 3. What do we see in paragraph 3?
So here, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I think here the author is talking about how you need to incorporate like your whole person, your body, and he, she, or they and mentioned 2 examples, capoeira and yoga.
Right, very nice. Let's see. We were still looking for stuff about learning. Learning the Brazilian art of capoeira has influenced the way he carries his body and his sense of balance. Okay, nice. And then learning yoga, the art of yoga, is this thing about mind-body dichotomy and moving the person toward enlightenment. Okay, so what we had over here is, once again, we have another person's ideas. Just as some of y'all, most of y'all probably didn't do this because I didn't talk about this a lot last week. But I do like to write down these people's ideas. This is this guy Downey's idea. We'll write Downey. And Downey talks about this thing about capoeira, and later somebody else talks about yoga. But really what's going on here is we're talking about learning for the whole person, beyond, what does he say, beyond the mind-body dichotomy. Learning for the whole person. That'll help you move toward enlightenment, something he says. And he also talks about capoeira, which I cannot spell. Oh, awesome. That's the first time I got that right. And yoga. And I do leave my blasts a little bit longer than I actually do when I do passages, when I do this, just because I don't want people to feel like, oh, I wrote this and you wrote this thing. I have no idea what's going on. Generally, when I was actually writing the blast, I probably wouldn't even leave it this long. This is a bit long for me. I like something like 4 or 5 words tops. But I'll do a pretty broad one for those of y'all who are following along. I know people have different ways that they like to do this. But either way, let's go over to paragraph 4. What do y'all see in paragraph 4?
I said that book plus social knowledge equals educated, or something like that.
Nice, yeah. So we're talking about a different person over here, Esther Prinz, And she's talking about, let's see, not just book knowledge, not just learning out of books, but social knowledge. And then they go off on this thing about respect. Esther Prinz conducted interviews of all these people. And this stuff is really detailed. They go into a lot of detail about this person's, the specific study. But we're not reading for detail. We're just looking for main idea kind of things. Let's see. And here we come back to our main point of education. This person was educated in the technical sense, but was not educated in the Salvadoran sense because he did not have social knowledge. Most of y'all probably didn't read this. I didn't read this either. But the idea is that you can't just have book knowledge. This person works in a bank, and I don't know, I guess those of us who are trying to go for doctorates and all that kind of stuff, we might think, but people who work in banks are relatively well educated. They're educated in the book sense, but not as much in the social sense. So we'll write that. We'll write Prinz social education more than books, or books and social, however you want to put that. We'll do this last paragraph, and then I will get to a few of y'all's questions before we dive into the actual passage questions. What did y'all think about this last paragraph? What was the vibe here?
It's basically like reinforcing the idea that social etiquette is important for education.
Right. Very nice. Let's see. Importance of learning social etiquette as part of their education. And yeah, there's just a couple more examples of what they think about that point. But here's really the main gist of what's going on there. Learning social etiquette is a very important part of education. Etiquette, another word I have a hard time spelling. Education. Okay, cool. So let's take a second and I'll answer a few questions that I have over here. Here's my thing. One-on-one sessions are mostly for students who are URM or on the FAP program. I have helped a few students who don't speak English as their first language as well. I have helped I've helped those students for free, at least for the first session. After the first session, it'll be $10 per session. And I'm trying to keep it to those students. If you have some kind of extenuating circumstance where you really feel like you would benefit from this and you're not able to do Kaplan or MCAT Bros or Princeton Review or the kind of tutoring that they offer, then feel free to let me know and I'll let you know what I think. But I am mainly targeting this toward people who cannot afford or cannot access one-on-one tutoring from Princeton Review or Kaplan or something like that. Because those things are very expensive. They charge, I don't know, 50, 70 bucks, something like that per hour. So that is who I'm trying to get to with, I have a limited amount of time. It's just me doing this one-on-one tutoring. So it's hard for me to get to every single person. When I read the passages, are you just finding the blast words? Generally, I'm looking for the blast words, and then probably I'll read a little bit around that blast word, maybe the sentence or so that the blast word is in, but I'm not reading things that don't have the blast word in them. So you see, when I highlight stuff, you know, the blast words, learning, education, are in these sentences. I highlighted the whole sentence and I read the whole sentence, but I'm ignoring this other part that doesn't have the blast word. Yeah, if you have really crazy long paragraphs, that was my example. I think Michael asked that and then lost connection for a second. So actually this first passage, originally when I found this passage, it looked like this. And that's really long. I don't like reading long blocks of text. That's no fun for anyone, even if you're a strong reader. And it's also really hard to summarize because if you try and summarize all that, you're going to end up with a lot of stuff in your blast. And so what I like to do is just split it up. You can just split it up mentally, or you can split it up on, the reason I say split it up mentally because on the actual MCAT, you're not going to be able to put that space in there. But then if they're too long paragraphs, then do the first half of the paragraph at a time. Do the first half, then do the second half, something like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the questions, and I will talk you guys through how I approach these questions. Suppose, okay, there's my keyword, suppose. There, they helped me out. I know what question type this is already. That is, if you're unsure, that is a skill 3B type question. It's a suppose, the keyword, and it's assessing the impact of incorporating new information or whatever into the question. So all of this information they're about to give me about public schools and prayer, that's new information. So suppose that public schools across the United States have implemented mandatory interfaith prayer hours at the start of the school day. In light of this information, the author's position would be, okay, so these are strengthened and weakened questions. I don't think if any of you guys are repeating the class from earlier in the week, I didn't talk about this very much. I didn't talk about strengthened and weakened questions, but I do want to, because a lot of people have asked me questions about strengthened and weakened. The first thing that I do, first of all, oops, see how do I do this? Don't look at strengthened, weakened until the end. The first thing that we're actually going to do on this question type, again, I'm going to send you all my notes on this. You know, if you want to write it down, you can. But the first thing that I'm going to do on this question is I'm going to start by trying to eliminate stuff via my blast. I'm going to look at all the stuff after strengthened and weakened, and I'm going to see, does this really match with what the author's saying? So the first one is reveal similarities between non-Western and Western education. Well, the vibe I was getting is he's talking about the differences between Western and non-Western education. So we'll go ahead and take that one out. It would show that Western education is holistic. No, I don't think he said Western education is holistic. He was talking about how yoga and all this other stuff is holistic, but not Western education. Take that out. Prayer would make school education less formal. I don't think he talked a lot about formality. You might have mentioned that maybe as one word somewhere or another, but it's not in my blast. It's not in my blast. I didn't really think that talking about formality was the main point of the article. So we'll go ahead and take out this one. Weakened, since prayer is a spiritual endeavor that goes beyond intellectual training. So now this is kind of reminding me of something that he said. This is reminding me of that stuff that he said about yoga. And so, well, by process of elimination, I've kind of gotten down to here, but just for the sake of explaining, let's go back to what he was saying about yoga. The art of yoga is yet another example of how learning goes beyond mind-body dichotomy in Western society. Yoga seeks to balance the mind, body, and spirit. Okay, yes, yoga and prayer is also a spiritual thing. I guess we can talk about our opinions on whether school prayer is good or not later. That's not really the point. The point is the author thinks that prayer is a spiritual endeavor that goes beyond intellectual training. And if we were left with a strengthened and weakened after we did this, we could then start thinking about, does this point really strengthen or weaken the author's point? And actually, it does weaken the author's point. It weakens the author's point because he says that in Western society, we don't focus on the spirit. Whereas if we started doing prayer in schools, we would be focusing on the spirit, so that has weakened his point. Okay, the first answer is D. That was I keep forgetting, this was a type 3B question. Type B, our keyword is suppose. And number 2, which statement best captures the overarching theme of the passage? Western education, ... Okay, so here's a keyword that I like, overarching theme. They like to rephrase this one and kind of mess with you a little bit. Sometimes they'll use overarching theme, they'll use central argument, main idea, something like that. But overarching theme questions or main idea questions, whatever you like to call them, are skill 1A questions, the basic component of the text. So let's take a look. This is a 1A question. Western education overly emphasizes the importance of vocational skills. Well, there's something that sounds kind of familiar to me, because at some point he said something about Western education is geared toward learning one's vocation. Okay, so we'll keep that one for now. Western education does not take into account spirituality. Yeah, I guess we could kind of justify this one. Western education does not include spirituality. Again, it's the vocational skills. Is more narrow than some other cultures. Now, I actually really like this one because this is a answer that is, first of all, correct. It is correct answer. It is correct in the sense that it matches what was in my blast. And it's also broad. It's also broad. When we're looking for overarching theme questions, we want something that's broad. These kind of vibe with what was in my passage, but they're not very broad. This is a pretty specific point that he made. This is a pretty specific point that he made. Is not as focused on the greater community. Yeah, he definitely said that at the I think it was the very beginning of the article. This is a trick that I used when I was doing the MCAT cars section, and I do not read the other things that are not directly related to the blast, usually. Unless for some reason I'm really confused later down the road and I'm looking at a question, I have no idea what's going on, then I might try and read more in depth. But when I'm doing my blast, I try not to read everything. I just read the stuff that has to do with the blast, or the main idea. And this is an overarching theme question. So I always want to go with an answer that is broad. This might be true. This is probably a true statement, but it's pretty specific. This, once again, is a true statement, but it's pretty specific. It would be hard for me to say that this is the main idea. Spirituality is the main idea of the passage. I don't think so. Vocational skills are the main idea of the passage. I don't think so. Greater community, once again, this is probably true. He probably mentioned this as a one-off point somewhere or another. But it's pretty specific. This is not the main idea of the passage. So go ahead and take that one out. And I'll go ahead and make a note on my thing. I thought I had this note, but apparently I don't. Understanding the basic components of the text. Whenever we're looking at these central argument, overarching whatever, main idea questions, we are looking for a broad answer because it's a pretty broad question. The main idea is a pretty broad concept. And so we are looking for a pretty broad answer. This is the broadest one, and it does vibe with what was in the paragraph. So we'll go ahead and pick that for now. Okay, the next question. He wrote a whole paragraph for us. In the country of Demon Baru, it is inappropriate to engage in workplace formality with colleagues of the same professional status. Suppose a renowned neurosurgeon from Boston works in Demon Baru, and he is viewed as uneducated for greeting his fellow physician colleagues in a very formal manner. This is an illustration of which of the following scholarly findings mentioned in the passage. Well, as far as question types, they tried to trick us a little bit because they didn't give us our keyword. They didn't give us our keyword. Our keyword for this type of question is suppose. This question reads exactly the same if you put in the word suppose over here, but they didn't actually give us that. But what we know is that all of this stuff about Demon Baru is brand new information. I've never heard of Demon Baru before in the passage or just in real life. I think Demon Baru is a fake country. I hope it's a fake country. Someone might be able to prove me wrong on that, but I've never heard of Demon Baru. This is all new information, new factors, new conditions, whatever you want to call it. That is the type of question we're looking at. This is type 3B. They did try and trick us. They didn't put our keyword in there, but it is a type 3B question. Oh, actually, they had the word suppose over here. I didn't even see that. They did have my keyword suppose. I've been telling everybody this is tricky to do the question types on, but oh well. Suppose a renowned neurosurgeon from Boston goes to Dimon Baru, and what this is reminding me of is that thing about social etiquette. This guy didn't know the social etiquette for how he's supposed to act in Dimon Baru. So let's go back and let's think about what he said about what we're talking about in terms of social etiquette. As far as social etiquette, this was our person, Prin's idea. And he's saying that there's also a thing as social education, and learning social etiquette is the same thing as education. Okay, so the first thing I notice is that we are looking at Esther Prin's ideas. We're not looking at Miriam's ideas. Let's go ahead and take out Miriam's stuff. Miriam's stuff was all the stuff at the very beginning of the article over here, but the social etiquette stuff was down here and was mainly talking about what Esther Prins thought. And let's see, education sometimes involves social knowledge. There's a pretty good one that vibes with what I put. There you're talking about social education and how that's a very important part of education, learning social etiquette and all that kind of stuff. So I like this one. It is made up. Thank you for letting me know. Someone in the chat has let me know that's made up. Okay, so I do like this one. Esther Prin's finding that treating others with respect is a sign of being educated. Now, I feel like I might be able to justify this one if I thought about it long enough, but I'm not really liking this answer choice immediately. And the reason is because that this guy, this neurosurgeon who went over to Dimon Baru, he treated his other colleagues with respect, but then they thought he was uneducated. So in Dimon Baru, treating others with respect is a sign of being uneducated. And also, I also didn't think that treating people with respect was really a main focus over here. It was mostly about social knowledge, not exactly treating people with respect. I think social knowledge is a better main idea from that paragraph than treating others with respect is. Go ahead and take this one out. And we will leave our thing. Education sometimes involves social knowledge. Awesome. So type 3B question. Okay. Which of the following ideas about attitudes in non-Western cultures does the author try to support by discussing yoga? Okay. So what we're looking for over here is really what is the author's main point? What does the author try to support when he discusses yoga? What does the author try to support when he discusses yoga? So now this type of question is where we are looking, that's no good. We are looking for how does X point, how does his point about yoga fit into the larger argument? And these kind of questions are what they refer to as reasoning within the text. We do need to have a perception of the main idea in order to do this. We do need to know the main idea. But the main idea itself is not the answer. Very important. We want to know, how does yoga fit into the main idea? So let's take a look at that. Let's see. Which of the following ideas about non-Western cultures does the author try to support by discussing yoga? Okay. Learning is a lifelong process. Well, he does say learning is a lifelong process, but I don't see that when he's talking about yoga. Just right here, when he's talking about yoga, he doesn't say much about lifelong process in terms of yoga. We'll go ahead and take that one out. When he was talking about yoga, he was more talking about spirituality and things like that. We can also see that in our blast. Here's where he talked about yoga. He's talking about learning for the whole person, enlightenment, things like that. So Mannerisms can indicate educational status. Now, once again, he did come to that point toward the end, I believe, but it was not really related to the yoga thing at all. So we'll take that out. Years of schooling is not enough to make you an educated person. I mean, that's probably a true statement. I think that's a true statement at least. But again, it was not very directly related to what he was saying about yoga. So we'll take that one out. Less intellectual endeavors are valued as a form of enlightenment. Well, there's something I like, because back when he was talking about yoga, he talked about enlightenment. And if we want to prove that to ourselves, we can kind of jump back to this text. We can see, what did he say about yoga? The art of yoga is yet another example of how learning goes beyond mind-body dichotomy. Yoga seeks to balance the mind, body, and spirit in an effort to move the whole person toward enlightenment. So he is saying that this is not exactly a super intellectual thing. This is not the same thing as biology or calculus. It is more of a spiritual endeavor, or less intellectual, if you want to consider it like that. And we're moving toward enlightenment. So we'll go ahead and pick this answer about enlightenment. Awesome. We'll jump on, oops, this was a 2 question. And we will jump on to question 5. Which of the following assumptions is most critical to the main point the author is making about the Brazilian practice of capoeira? So one more. We're looking now at this thing about capoeira, and he gave us a keyword. The keyword is, which of the following assumptions does the author make? Which of the following assumptions does the author make? This is once again a type 2 question. And very importantly, we're not really looking for the main idea about capoeira. We're looking for which of the following assumptions is critical about capoeira. So it's probably not something that he directly stated about capoeira. It's probably more something that's an assumption. Let's keep that in mind. Westerners do not engage in physical activities similar to capoeira. I don't think he ever directly said that or implied that. He did talk about capoeira. He said it helped his balance, but I don't think he said anything about Westerners not doing that. Even like the Westerner, non-Westerner thing is not very related to capoeira. I don't see that up here. So we'll go ahead, we'll take that out. Capoeira improves a person's physical balance. Well, that's definitely true. That is the main idea about capoeira. Capoeira. Y'all know what I mean. This is the main idea about capoeira. But again, we're not looking for the main idea. We're looking for an assumption about capoeira. So we'll take that out. Brazilians no longer practice capoeira as frequently as before. I didn't see anything about that. When I was reading about capoeira, I didn't see anything about Brazilians stop doing capoeira. It's not in my blast for sure. Yeah, nothing about that. So let's go ahead and take that one out. Capoeira is a form of education. There's one that I kind of like, because he did refer to capoeira. He didn't directly say anywhere in here, I don't think, that capoeira is a form of education. No, he trained in capoeira, stuff like that. But he didn't say capoeira is a form of education. He didn't directly state this. But he definitely thinks that's true. He definitely thinks capoeira is a form of education, which helped him with his balance. And so we can kind of say that that is an assumption that we have to make, or the author has to make. And we will go ahead and put that down as our assumption. And the author's argument suggests that the primary motive of people in Western culture who pursue education is to, I don't know why it still says the number 2 there. It's not right. The author's Arguments suggest that the primary motive of education, of people in Western culture pursue education. So this is another one. This is a main idea type question. Main idea, or he says primary motive. Motive of learners in Western society, or Western culture, I think he says. Once again, primary motive, main idea, similar kind of deal. Formally pursue a vocation for individual gain. Well, that seems to kind of vibe with what I had in my blast. Let's see, Westerners are focused on vocation, or focused on job training. We'll go ahead and keep that for now. Accumulate higher social status and respect. I don't remember reading much about that. I don't remember reading that these Westerners want to stun on people with their degrees or anything like that. So take that out. Obtain economic independence and security. We might be able to kind of justify that to ourselves if we thought about it long and hard enough. But I think this is a bit of a stretch. He didn't really directly say that. Our vocation thing, he directly said that. So I like that one more. This is a bit of a stretch. We'll take that out. Remain competitive in a capitalist economy. One more time, that's a bit of a stretch. Again, we might be able to logic our way into justifying that. But what he said that I put down in my blast is that Western society or Western education is focused on vocational stuff. So we'll take that out because I think that this one is a better education, or a better answer. The Western people in pursuing education are focused on pursuing a vocation. Okay, we are done with our passage. I'm going to take questions in a second here. I do want to remind y'all a few things. Cross-out didn't happen. Okay. I do want to remind y'all of a few things. The things I want to remind y'all of is that you have homework. Why is this still crossed out? You have homework. It is on the same page that you got the material for this class, the same page that you got this document I'm working with right now. Same page as the material. It is basically to do some practice passages and log which questions you miss. Types you miss. You can do those practice passages from anywhere. You can do Khan Academy, you can do Jack Weston, you can do the official AAMC ones if you want. You can do whatever you want. But the goal is, I think I asked you to do about 8 passages. You can break that up over a week or so. 8 passages is the length of the COVID CARS section. And we are going to keep a little log of which question types you missed as you do that. I will send you personal feedback, likely early next week. I'm going to give everybody some time to do this. I'll get to some people this weekend if you've already done it. I'll also send everyone else personal feedback maybe early next week. Tips for those particular question types is what I'll send you. And I'm also doing one-on-one tutoring. And if you are interested in this, please email me. And I'll send you a little link to a little calendar thing where you can sign up for some one-on-one tutoring. Okay, that being said, that is pretty much all I had for class today. I am 7 minutes over my time. So if you guys want to go, I totally understand. Feel free to head out and enjoy your Friday night. If you guys have some questions that you'd like to ask me, I will stick around for a little bit and we can talk about some questions. Thank you guys.
I
Thank
just
you,
had a
everybody.
quick question that might help everyone. I was just wondering on the exam, like on the real MCAT, will we be able to have the function like command like F or control F where you
No.
can like search the document for a
No.
word? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, bummer. Okay. That was helpful a lot in my practice, but okay, good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, you don't. Okay, I'm going to try and get to these questions here in the chat. Westerners not valuing the practice going beyond mind body. Okay, let's see. Let's take a look at that one. Well, right here, he says that the mind-body dichotomy is what we have established in Western society. So I think that he pretty directly states that deal, that Westerners at least value that this kind of stuff pretty heavily. That is the reason that I didn't think that this thing about mind-body dichotomy is something that was an assumption. The answer to number 5, it's D. Capoeira is a form of education. Oh, y'all said that already. Is there a way to watch week 1 session? Yes, there is. It is up on, you guys probably got to this class today by filling out this link, the free cars tutoring link. You probably got to that link by checking out my website, which is right here. And here's my recording of this, the week 1 session. I'm going to record this session as well. I am recording it. And I'm going to put that right down here in case you're curious about how to get there from fresh. What you got to do is go to freethemcat.org. Freethemcat.org. I promise it's not this slow in real life. It's just because my computer is slow. I spent a lot of time trying to make this really fast. And then you can click right here under quick links. It says free cars classes. And you can watch the class 1. You can also click this little link right here, and you'll be able to access both the material for class 1 and view my notes for class 1. And you can also do the homework if you like. The homework is linked right there.
Hey Yash, can I ask a question about number 4?
Yeah.
So I ended up being stuck between C and D, and I'm just not sure why D would be the better answer.
That's a great question. He did say, so I think the reason you're probably justifying C is where he's talking about lifelong learning. Is that right?
My thought process was, I didn't think he ever mentioned like less intellectual, so I just ended up choosing C.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually did the same thing, Alex.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the reason that C stood out to me is because of this word enlightenment right here. But I do see where y'all are coming from, where it's less intellectual. I think it's weird for us to say that yoga is not an intellectual thing. So let's take a look. Okay, right here, he says that yoga goes beyond the mind-body. So whereas Western society education is like a mind-body thing, you might learn stuff for your mind, and you go to PE class in high school, and you learn some stuff for your body in Western society. But yoga is different because yoga is about the mind, is about the body, and is also about the spirit. So instead of being about 2 things, it's about 3 things. So I guess that leaves you less time for the body side, for the mind side of it, is how I would justify that. Honestly, I didn't think that much about it. I didn't really think that much about this idea of less intellectual. I just highlighted this word enlightenment, and I picked that. And the reason is because when you have this kind of question where they're referring a specific point, they're referring specifically about yoga. So we go to this section about yoga, and we just trying to look for what matches closely with this section about yoga. And in this section about yoga, I didn't see much about lifelong process. I didn't see much about mannerisms or educational status. I didn't see much about years of schooling, educated person, whatever. I did see some stuff about enlightenment, and that is how I arrived on the answer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Did that kind of answer your question? I want to make sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yes, me and one of my friends did I guess you can call it coding for that. We used a little template thing to help us out, but we mostly coded it ourselves. That was a project, definitely. What tips do you have when stuck between 2 options? When stuck between 2 options, this is a good question. This is what usually trips people up. People, when they're doing the car section in general, most of the questions, it's not too bad to narrow yourself down to two answer choices. The real trickiness happens when you have to pick between those two answer choices that kind of sound good to you. There's a couple things that I do to help me with that. When I have two answer choices, let's write this down and I'll put this on my notes too. The number one thing that I'm looking for is which answer choice agrees with the author's opinion better. With the author's opinion better. That's the number one thing that I'm looking for, because obviously all of this is about analyzing the author's opinion and what the author thinks. The number two thing that I'm looking at is, what is the question asking me? And what does that mean for my answer choice? And I know this sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but what I mean by this, let's give some examples. If the question is looking for the main idea, for example, that means I want something that's broad. So I'm going to have to pick the broadest answer choice. If the author is asking about what does it mean when the author uses X phrase, like I think we had that question up here somewhere. What is the function of this phrase? Then I want to pick the one that is closest to that phrase. I'm going to find that phrase and I'm going to try my best to find an answer that I can justify with just this sentence. Does that make sense? Because they've specifically targeted you toward a phrase. And so I'm going to look for an answer that is very close to the phrase in the text. So those are my two things that I try and kind of ask myself when I'm stuck between two questions.
What?
Okay, let's check.
Excuse me. I just have one question about the assumption questions I've been keep asking about. I'm just like having trouble doing those.
Okay.
Things. It's like assumption is something that the author like implies, or it's an assumption that something that it's like a logical prerequisite for his conclusion.
Yes, that's definitely true. Let's see how I can help you out with that. Let's go over to an assumption question, this thing about capoeira, and let's take a look at this question. Which of the following assumptions is most critical to the main point the author is making? Let's go ahead and we'll take this stuff out just for the sake of illustrating what I'm talking about right now. We will take all this stuff out so we don't confuse ourselves. So what do I know? I'm looking for an assumption. And my general description of what an assumption question is I am not looking for something that the author directly stated. If the author directly states that capoeira improves a person's physical balance, that is not an assumption. You with me there?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the first part of it. This one is kind of irrelevant in the sense, I don't think he ever said this. I don't think he ever referenced this in any way, implied it, any of that. Are you with me there?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what you're probably taking a look at is that this whole time we were comparing and contrasting stuff between Western and non-Western society, right? And so you would probably think that the reason he's mentioning capoeira is because that is something that Westerners don't do.
Yeah, like that's exactly what I thought. I thought that was like a step to his conclusion that the Westerners do not go really beyond the beyond just the minds.
Right. So where I'm getting that answer from is when he's talking about capoeira, I don't see anything about Western versus non-Western in here. When he's talking about capoeira, he seems to be talking about learning as a whole. You see where he says learning is holistic right here?
Mm-hmm.
If I was going to pick that answer, the reason I would pick that answer choice is if he qualified this. If he said something like non-Western learning is holistic and then started talking about capoeira, now I'm with you. If he started talking about Western learning is holistic, obviously that answer is not wrong. But the reason I picked this one is because at least right here, he seems to be talking about all learning is holistic. Do you see where I'm getting at now?
Yeah. I think it's just like the word education doesn't really like clicks. Doesn't really.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit of a weird word. He doesn't ever really say right here that capoeira is a form of education, but his kind of perspective on capoeira, like it helped him improve his balance. It's learning, it's the training that he's doing. It seems like those words kind of match up pretty well with education, and that is why I chose that answer ultimately. If you want, we can do some one-on-one tutoring on this. I'm happy to help you out. We can, I can like specifically find some assumption type questions, and we
Yeah,
can take
sure.
a look at
Because
them.
I mostly just got these like assumption questions wrong, like
Yeah.
again over and over.
Do me a favor, send me an email that says you want to do one-on-one tutoring and that you want to focus on assumption type stuff,
Thank
and I got you.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
I have a question about how your tutoring works.
Yeah.
Because like I like had a session with the tutor this week, and honestly, I don't think it went too well because it was a lot of just like the person talking at me, and it wasn't very interactive. And I kind of expected them to like go through a passage with me and try to figure out what I was doing wrong, but it wasn't that. It was just
Yeah.
being talked at.
When I do this class, I tend to talk a lot, and I hate it because
I like classes though, actually.
yeah. So the first thing that I do in all of my tutoring sessions is I try and identify what you want out of the tutoring session. A lot of people, they come in, they're like, oh, I'm having trouble with strengthening, weakening questions. I'm having trouble with assumption questions like he was just talking about or whatever.
Yeah.
So what I generally am going to do is I'm going to give you a passage and I'm going to give you some answers, and I'm going to have you talk me through how you would approach it. And based on that, I'm going to try and kind of treat that as a diagnostic, and I'm going to try and diagnose where your issues are coming from. And then we are going to spend some time focusing specifically on that. That's the general structure I've been using.
How much time do you dedicate to your one-on-ones? Just because like my exam is coming up, so I don't want to waste your time if you can't help me. But
when's your exam?
On July 7th.
Oh, I got you. I can do Sunday with you. I think I'm busy. I have a couple of sessions signed up tomorrow, and I don't have much time tomorrow anyway, but I'm free all day Sunday. And there's plenty of time available on Sunday. I do Tuesday and Thursday most of the day. I can do one-on-ones, and then Saturday and Sunday, depending on my personal availability. Sometimes I have other stuff to do, but I try to do Saturdays and Sundays too.
Gotcha. So like how many sessions like do kids usually do with you? Like what do you usually
I just started doing this week. So no one has done more than like 3 sessions so far.
Okay.
For this first week, just because I'm just starting out and I'm not the most experienced one-on-one cars tutor. So the first session is totally free. After the first session, if you decide you want to stick with it, it'll be $10 a session. And most people, I have a few other people who are signing up to do the July 7th test. I believe he signed up for 5 or 6 sessions, but it's up to you. I mean, obviously, it's your choice.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Because I honestly, if someone just like tells me what I'm doing wrong, I could fix it.
Okay. That's the first thing that we're going to try and do at the beginning. We're going to try and figure out where your issues or where your problems or struggles or whatever are coming from.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I did send you an email, so I will.
Perfect. I will get back to you, and I will send you a link that'll get you to a scheduling thing.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Okay, so I have a question when it pertains to practice, and it's specifically like with Jack Weston. Like sometimes I'll do his passages and I'll get like 5 out of 5, but then the next passage is like 3 out of 5 with your method. How do I make sure that it's, you know, not sloppy logic compared to AAMC, which is kind of clear?
That's a good question. I've heard, again, my goal is not to like mess up Jack Weston's business or whatever. There's a lot of people who Jack Weston helps out. I've repeatedly heard this complaint that the logic in Jack Weston's passages and questions does not really reflect the logic that AAMC likes. I personally, when I was studying for the card section, I didn't know Jack Weston existed, really. I did most of my stuff off of Princeton Review and the AAMC material, and that worked for me. I've recently, this past weekend, I went through a bunch of Jack Weston stuff as preparation for this. And let's say I agreed with those complaints that I heard, that Jack Weston's material does not directly, they're pretty different from what AAMC likes. My advice to you, as far as that goes, is just to change it up as much as you can. Because even though Jack Weston's logic is different, you are practicing the fundamental skill set of reading things and answering questions based on them. And if you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into that logic, then change it up. Do a Jack Weston passage, then do a Khan Academy passage, and then do a something else passage, and then make sure you're not just doing things from one resource. Because if you do, then when you take the real test and it's not like the resource that you were studying off of, you're going to be really confused. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got you. Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Also, just to add, Jack Weston did convert all the Khan Academy passages to like the actual AAMC formatting. So like you don't actually have to go to the Khan Academy website. You could just go to Jack.
Oh, you finished that? That's awesome.
Yeah, so they're all in the right format.
Okay, perfect. I will take a look at that. Thank you for letting me know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys, if you have some more questions, you can feel free to ask me, but otherwise I'm going to end this call pretty soon. For Frida, oh, I did get your question. Perfect. Yeah, as far as prep companies that closely resemble AAMC, I think Kaplan and Princeton Review are not bad. I personally, when I was doing my tutoring sessions, I used a lot of Princeton Review stuff, and I thought they were pretty good, honestly. The AAMC official ones that you can buy off the AAMC website are better. That's a reality. There's nothing that matches that. But my general advice to people is to change it up as much as you can. Don't use the same resource for all of your cards practice, because every single resource is different from AAMC in a slight way. And so you do want to change it up and make sure you're not just learning how to answer Jack Weston passages, or just learning how to answer Kaplan passages, or just learning how to answer Princeton Review passages. You want to practice the entire skill set as a whole. And so just change it up as much as you can. That's my general advice to people. And okay, I'm gonna end the call. If you guys have any questions, you can always email me, message me on Facebook, whatever works for you, and I'll be happy to get back to you guys. Thank you. Have a great night.